Good morning, Chris. How are you doing today?
Good, Arrow. How about you?
Absolutely fantastic, and very excited to talk with you because I'm so proud of you for putting this book together, because I live or act the life of a Penn State warrior, basically. We don't know the story anymore, and you are bringing it forward saying, hey, look, something has happened that is brilliant, and it's the body, the students that really made this work.
Yeah, as a Penn State alum, a lifelong sort of fan of the program, as you can imagine, in 2011 when the news about Jerry Sandusky first broke, I was heartbroken, gut-wrenched, and then really sort of confused and shocked, right, when the national media descended on the campus, and really kind of the story heated up so fast. People were kind of pushing for heads. You lost longtime coach Joe Paterno, you lost the athletic director, you lost the university president. They were all kind of let go. And I'm not going to argue that shouldn't have happened. But I think for those kids on the program, that was like, their whole world had been turned upside down. And for alums like me, it was the same thing. We were looking for answers, trying to wrap our heads around what happened. And all of a sudden, the whole thing imploded in a matter of months. And so when the NCAA came forward and issued those sanctions, and people were talking about the death penalty, it was hard to kind of wrap your head around that. And the fact that these players, all of 18, 19, 20 years old, kind of stepped forward in front of the cameras in the entire world and said, hey, one man didn't build this program. One man's not going to tear this program around. My heart went out to those. I was inspired by that, as were a lot of my friends. And so, when I wanted to do a book, I thought I wanted to kind of take a look at those players that stepped forward in 2012 and that Big Ten championship win in 2016 and say, can I connect the dots? Wow. I think there might be a pretty good story there. And I was lucky. There was a great story there.
Is it still an open wound? Is it a black eye? Or are we in the moments of healing? Because, with you just sharing that, I'm going, oh, my God, I was there. I felt that. I know the emotion he's talking about. Oh, my God.
I feel like it was a healing, in particular, when that Big Ten championship in 2016, that team won. I feel like that kind of said, okay, the program has survived. We have talent that's still sort of coming in. We have a program that's able to compete at the, not just the national level, but the top national level, right? They were a team that people were considering for the playoffs at that moment. And so I do feel like for the average Penn State fan, yes, that healing has happened. I'm not going to sort of speak for some of the victims of the crimes, that Jerry Sandusky committed. But I think there's a lot of people that look at the school and the program and they're not quite ready to forgive.
The layout of this book is so magnetic. It's almost like I can hear their voices. What made you decide to do it this way?
I had covered the program in in its heyday in the 80s when I was there on campus. And I had moved on to work in magazines in New York. So those guys had no idea who I was. I still had friends who covered the team, and they were able to kind of introduce me to some of the players when I first wanted to do this. But I wasn't in any position to kind of sell my house and move my family to State College for, 2 years to kind of do the reporting. And so I felt like I needed some way to kind of set those players at ease. They had been burned by the national media in 2011. And so I felt like oral history was the way to do it. It was basically saying, hey, look, this story is not going to come out in my words. It's going to come out in your words. And I want to tell your story. And I hope you will trust me to do that. So that's kind of the initial instinct. But I also have to say that I had done a little bit with oral history, and I love the fact that when you got to key moments, right, and that 4 overtime game against Michigan, when you talk about the 21-point rally against Wisconsin in that Big Ten championship game, the block, key kick block in the Ohio State game in 2016, I love the tick-tock that happens, right, when you're kind of jumping from one voice to the other, from one perspective. I had players on the field, players on the sideline, people in the stands kind of responding to that, and oral history just lent itself brilliantly to that. You kind of really felt those moments come alive in the book.
But you know what's great about this, Chris, though, is that this is not just a Penn State book. This is a book where somebody who is a Tar Heel or a UCLA Bruin, they're going to read this book, and it's not. In other words, it's not so lopsided in the way where it's all Penn State. No, this is an every person kind of book.
Yeah, and I thank you for saying that, but I agree with you. It's first of all, like the fact that you could find a story with any inspiration, right, and
Yeah.
all that horror that happened in 2011, the monstrosity of those crimes that Jerry Sandusky committed. But for me, I latched on to right away just the fact that these were, we're talking about 18, 19, 20-year-olds, right? Like I said. And I think that younger generations get bashed time and again for not being with it, right? For not having the courage or the kind of strength or the grit. These guys exhibited that like every single day. I knew that I had a great story in 2012, the way that season turned out. I knew I had a great story in 2016. I had to write about 2014, 2015, right? 2013 as well. So there were 3 years in there when they were losing, right? They never had a losing record, but they were losing games that they would have won in the past. And I need to find a way to kind of tell that story. And really, what came through was that these guys were, even in the midst of all that, they were able to get up and go to work every single day just because they believed in that program. They believed in that idea of success with honor. And that might have been not be what Jerry Sandusky stood for. I'm not sure that even those sort of grown-ups in the administration and the board of trustees kind of stood for that to the degree they would like, but can't question it in those players, right? They brought their full heart to trying to restore the program. They believed deeply in the value of that program, and they were willing to kind of risk everything in a lot of ways. They were risking their reputations. They were risking their football futures, right? They didn't know if the program was going to be around in 6 months. And I think for guys that had NFL aspirations, they put all of that on the line to kind of suit up and play Penn State football. And as a fan, as an alum, I have great respect for that.
It's a book of how your voice can become active. It can change things. And when these guys came forward and said it is about everybody who built this, and I mean, it's so inspirational in the way that you can look at your own life and see that. I mean, this book should have come with a yellow highlighter. There's so many things inside this book that are so important to everybody's personal challenges in life.
Yeah, and that came out time and again. I was reporting this book in the heart of the pandemic, so working remotely like all of us were, was a time when you were kind of scared to go outside of your home because you didn't know what was happening,
Exactly.
right? People were afraid of sort of catching COVID at that point. And I would, do my work day and then have an interview set up in the evening with these guys. And again, just found it so inspiring. They were so thoughtful, so smart, believed so deeply in what they had done and the significance of that, and to listen to them speak in their voices and tell their stories night after night was, for me, remarkably inspiring. And I thought there was a good story in here, like I said, but I knew it when I heard those guys, when I heard what they had to say. And it really does show, if you use your voice, right, and you put yourself to something that you deeply believe in, great things happen.
Absolutely. And it comes at such a great time because we need voices right now, and this book really does provide that. But let me ask you a question here, though. In the way of when they took it public, when they had that inside their heart, that what they were going to do, I can't imagine what the naysayers were doing to them. I mean, we were now in a social media world. What were the emails? What were the text messages? What were the things on social media that they were saying to them?
Yeah, well, some of these guys had to kind of stop paying attention to that. I mean, There were people that thought that they were molested by Jerry Sandusky. I mean, he hadn't been there for 10 programs. These kids were like in elementary school the last time that Jerry Sandusky had coached for the program. So they had no idea who he was. So there were people that were saying that they were victims of this. There were people that were saying that they were heartless, I guess, for pushing forward, that Penn State deserved the death penalty. There was a lot of heat when they were sort of on the road, right? People shouting at them from behind the benches, right? And I wrote a brief piece. I had a friend from Esquire that reached out in the days after the scandal broke to see if there was something I wanted to write about. And I kind of wrote about the Joe Paterno I knew in the 1980s, when that program was in its heyday. I saw what happened with those players that came in and played for him when they came in as freshmen, and as they left as bright young men before leaving the program. And I wrote, that it would be a tragedy if all of that was lost, but noted the fact that, the Joe Paterno I knew wouldn't have accepted the, hey, I reported to my superior and I ignored it after that. I let it go. I didn't think he lived up even to his own standard there. But I tell you this story because in the hours after that story was posted online, my Facebook feed was just littered with people who were, basically kind of pushing back against me. The heat was so intense that I was kind of like, oh, maybe this wasn't a great idea, right, for me to go on the record with a story like this. So for those players that kind of stepped forward, I knew like they were right in the belly of the beast, right? They were going to be facing the national media. They're going to be facing, angry crowds in the months going forward, and yet they were still willing to kind of come forward and say, hey, this is an important moment in this program. This idea of success with honor is important, and we're going to kind of do what it takes to bring the program back.
The importance of this book right now in this place where we are is it's a huge one of a kind. And the reason why I say that is because for the past couple of weeks, all I've done is interviews with people about college hazing, getting students ready for hazing. And yet here comes your book, Men in White, and it has a positive about the universities. I mean, these people, they took on the fight and they didn't have the flight. In other words, they didn't run away. They knew what they needed to do. And that's why this book is so important right now.
Absolutely. My son was, I think, 11 or 12 when, in 2012, when this 2011, when it sort of first broke, and became a Penn State fan. I tried to get him like from birth, draw him into it. But he became a Penn State fan like right during the stretch that is recorded in the book. And I could not have asked for better role models. You look at guys like Michael Mauti, who stepped forward and said, had that quote about the one man, not tearing the program down. You look at Christian Hackenberg, who had committed to the program, and then the NCAA sanctions came down, and he stayed committed to that program. You got guys like Saquon Barkley and Trace McSorley, who are not only awesome on the football field, but the moment the games were over, were over on the sidelines, sort of signing autographs and speaking so thoughtfully about the program to TV and to radio interviews. And I was like, you couldn't ask for, as I said, better role models for a child, and that really resonated with me.
Is this book your Fleetwood Mac Rumors or the Eagles Hotel California? In other words, it is so powerful. It's like, what's next, Chris? I mean, come on. I mean, the way that you write and the way that you present it to us. I mean, this is the top of the mountain. But then again, knowing you, it's just a rolling hill.
No, brother, you don't know how true that is. I've been trying to think about like what book 2 would be, and it is a pretty high bar. It's very difficult. I would like it to kind of be bigger than this one, but I would love, to tell another story that's that inspiring. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to kind of put those two things together. This really ended up being, in many ways, sort of like a perfect storm. I went into it thinking, hey, if I can draw connect the dots between that NCAA sanctions announcement in 2012, Big Ten championship game in 2016, there might be a cool story in here. And I was really, could not have asked for a better story, actually, in those middle years. So, I hope there's another story out there like that. Anybody has one, please reach out to me. I would love to hear it, but it will be tough to top this one.
In a very creative way, is this not the national championship trophy, this book? And the reason why I say that is because I don't see any plaques. I don't see any trophies for those that stood up and made their way through this.
I think it is for those guys. I mean, I think, I will say this. When that 2012 season ended, they put that year up on the Ring of Honor at Penn State. And those, teams that are acknowledged on that Ring of Honor have either won national championships, Big Ten championships, or have been undefeated. So for a team with what would have been a lackluster record in any other year at Penn State to be up there, I think for them, that moment I know was like, there were a lot of tears shed. So I feel like that's really, that to them is their trophy. But I think a lot of these guys went through this ordeal, came out the other side. I think there are some people that kind of appreciate it, but I don't think the world at large understands what they did. And this really is their story. It's in their words. And I'm just glad that, they trusted me to sort of try and tell it with care and detail. And I'm hoping that people kind of read it and understand, like, this is a significant campaign that these guys went through. It was a 5-year ordeal for many of them to come out the other side. And they deserve to be recognized for that, for what they put into it.
Because I believe that what we do today affects the next 7 generations, I have to ask, what are they doing today? Can you imagine what they're doing with their communities today, knowing what they did for their university? I mean, it was their own little place where they built it together. Now, what are they doing for the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that I love about this story also is that, there were a decent number of these guys that went on to like NFL careers, although, the NFL career is only sort of 3 or 4 years, right, for most players. But the vast majority of them kind of went on and got jobs, right? So they're working in construction. They're working in, Joe Julius, the kicker, was sort of like working for a car sales, he was a car dealer. So they went on to kind of regular jobs. But some of them are like coaching high school football. Many of them still run sort of football camps. A lot of them still sort of work with youth as mentors and role models. So these are guys that went back into into life as the average human beings like you or I, right? And they're contributing. They continue to contribute to society. So you got to tip your hat to them for that.
One of the things that really inspires me about this book is the fact that here was this major storm, these gigantic ocean waves crashing against the shore, and yet there was a little ripple. They created a ripple that became something that changed. That to me is so inspiring, that they were able to have the strength to create a ripple in the middle of a storm.
Yeah, and I don't know they fully understood that that's how it was going to work in the end. I think they kind of stepped forward, like I said, in front of those TV cameras to kind of, to have that press conference. I think I knew right away how remarkable that was. As somebody who's covered the program, first of all, even a year earlier, 2 years earlier under Joe Paterno, there's no way that players get to call their own press conference, right? Go before ESPN TV cameras to kind of talk to the world. So that was, struck me as really remarkable from the start. But you got to remember in 2012, they lost those first 2 games of the year, right? They lost to Ohio. And they lost to Virginia, 2 teams they wouldn't have had trouble with before. So things could have collapsed right then and there, too. And they had to kind of find the strength to rebound. And that in the book, you will just see there time and time again, they had to kind of find the strength to kind of step forward, right? They had to rely on walk-ons and true freshmen. And players that, there's one guy that literally almost plucked out of the stands. He was a freshman, a long snapper that they found in tryouts. He had watched the first few games of the season in the stands with the other students. So that's what it took to bring the program back. They were playing against Ohio State and Michigan, teams that were stacked with players with full scholarships. Team like Wisconsin, and they were actually able to kind of compete with those programs. And that shows you like how big the heart was on those players.
Wow. Speaking of heart, I'm so glad that you listened to your heart and you put this book together as we grow into another brand new season of college football, dude.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad that you see it that way and really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about it.
Well, you got to come back anytime in the future, Chris. The door is always going to be open for you.
I appreciate it, Errol. Thank you very much. I'd love to do that.
You be brilliant today, okay, sir?
All right, bud. You too.